Happy 30th anniversary, Tim Burton's Batman. You sure did have a lot of video games attached to you. Hey, Chris Baker here. If you caught part 1 of this 2-video celebration of 30 years of Tim Burton's Batman, you know what an effect that movie had on my lifelong love of comics and superheroes. It defined a new age of film hype, and a huge part of that was the games. 8 completely different takes on Keaton vs. Nicholson, spanning 4 publishers between 1989 and 1991. But what were these games? And more importantly, which were the best? We'll get to that, but first, some ground rules. This isn't just a straight ranking of which game plays the best. That's absolutely important, in fact it's mostly important, but if a Batman game doesn't make you feel like you are Batman, and that you are in a world accurate to Batman lore, it kind of fails at being a Batman game, doesn't it? So we have to take that into consideration as well. With that in mind, because we're celebrating 30 years of Tim Burton's Batman here, we'll rate all 8 of these games out of 30. First comes what I'll call the video game score, where we look at things merely at the level of being a good video game that's fun to play. Batman's involvement doesn't actually mean anything, it just matters that we're enjoying ourselves and that it's a cool experience, Dark Knight or not. 20 of our points go to the video game score. But the next 10? That's what I'll refer to as the Batman score. And it correlates to what we referred to when I worked at Marvel as brand assurance. Do the characters look and act like they should? Does it feel like you're actually in Burton's version of Gotham City? For that matter, since they're all movie games set within the confines of the film's universe, how well do they adapt the plot? Brand assurance is an important component of license-based games that lesser fans don't care much about. But that's not you, and it's certainly not me, so 33% of our ranking goes to the Batman score. This rating system is quite the wild card, and it leads to some interesting results you might not agree with at first. Or at all. But what fun is a list without some controversy? Before we start the list, I'd like to at least acknowledge the existence of Data East's Batman pinball machine released in 1991. I remember playing it for the first time while visiting Memphis's Hickory Ridge Mall, probably in 1993 because Indiana Jones pinball was there too, and that's when that came out. Pretty sure I nailed my first ever ramp on this table, which was an amazing feeling and led to a lifetime love of pinball. But alas, there's no video game version of this pinball table, so it doesn't get ranked here. But if it did, it'd be near the top. Definitely ahead of this one.
Tiger's Batman wrist game for the time of your life.
Of all the games ranked here, the Batman LCD Watch by Tiger Electronics, yes, it is very much a video game and deserves to be recognized as such, is the only one I've never actually played. Obvious reasons. But I did try out the occasional watch game in my youth, and like the rest, it's a pretty fair assumption that this one sucked based simply on the fact that it was designed to be played with one hand while you wore it on your wrists. Maybe that's not fair, but the truth is that there's no stability on your wrist with any of these, making for a pretty miserable overall gaming experience. It's also too small to play comfortably holding in your hands like a standard Tiger Electronics handheld of the day. You pretty much have to play it on a flat table, like Sly DC here. My description of his actions is totally not adapted from the marketing text on the back of the packaging. Look at him go as he helps Batman TM defend Gotham City TM against the Joker TM and 3 other of his vicious henchmen in this 5-level game, defeating the evil henchman with his ninja wheel and spear gun. He's jumping and running forward to escape. His high scores will be retained, and he can turn the sound on or off to hear the built-in melody or alarm. Needless to say, this just isn't a very ideal gaming session, so the video game score here is a 5 out of 20. Perhaps it can make up some points in the Batman score? Not really. Batman certainly looks like Batman, so that's cool. And the black suit really comes through in the watch's limited color palette of dark black and, however many colors there are in the background insert. And I think that's the Joker there to the right. Tough to say for sure since his henchman's smile is pretty much the same, but let's go with that. The bat signal is cool, but if this is based on the movie, then it shouldn't even be there because the Joker died right before the grand unveiling. And what was that about Batman, TM, wielding a ninja wheel and using a spear gun as weapons? Did he ever use those? Why couldn't they just have been different types of batarangs if we're just dealing in long-range attacks here? And really, no punches, even when you're right next to a dude? So, pretty much everything except Batman himself is off the mark here. The Batman score is a 2 out of 10. Overall, that's a paltry 7 out of 30 for Tiger's Batman wristwatch game. Then again, it does tell the time. I'll give it the benefit of the doubt and assume accurately. So it does have one thing going for it. And hell yeah, I would have worn one of these if it was given to me as a gift or something. Still not as cool as the fake Transformers watch I ordered for Bonkers candy proof of purchases in 3rd grade though.
Games like Batman. Choose your weapons in this 4-level game of action as you jump from rooftop to rooftop trying to get through 6 vicious henchmen to get the Joker. But can you defeat him to win?
Hey, remember like 2 minutes ago when I mentioned the Tiger handheld units? Here's the one for Batman. And it's actually fully playable right now through your browser at the Internet Archive, which is how I got this footage. And playing it that way, I have to say there's the background of fun to the overall experience. You really have to be on your toes to dodge everything coming at you, and to reciprocate your attacks with batarangs. I didn't hate it. But again, I played on a keyboard, and that's actually pretty important when considering what it's like to play this relic, which, if you don't know, is but one of dozens of usually licensed handheld games that define Tiger Electronics for pretty much the entirety of the 90s and maybe some of the late 80s too. For kids like me who weren't rich enough for an actual Game Boy at the time, it was kinda all we had for gaming on the go. And though not as bad as playing an LCD game on a wristwatch, Tiger still never really mastered the act of their games actually feeling good to play on a tactile level. I don't actually have the Batman one, but it's really not that different from the X-Men one I do have here, and let me tell ya, playing on an actual unit is decidedly less fun than the mildly fun experience a keyboard has to offer. The buttons just don't respond very well, and you're completely out of luck if there's no light source nearby. It's worse than a Game Boy in that regard. I don't think it's an unfair assumption this all holds true for Batman as well. So we've got about a 7 out of 20 here in terms of video game score, and that may be a little generous even. When speaking to the brand, Tiger's Batman handheld fares a little better than the wristwatch did, but not by much. Once again, Batman very much resembles the Dark Knight, and this time there's no doubting which of these adversaries represents the Clown Prince of Crime, even if he doesn't so much resemble Jack Nicholson as he does Bob Hope. Or maybe Tiger was actually adapting this?
Okay, you fiend, what's the idea?
It's super glue. I want you two to be fast friends, you know? Come, Lois. Stick together, man. Come on, Lois.
Even as a kid, that wasn't funny. But where the branding really falls apart here is the setting. At no time in the film did Batman ever fight the Joker on a rooftop, which is where you're stuck for the entire game here. All they had to do was maybe add a bell in the corner to represent the cathedral, or maybe stick some simple art on the walls for the museum, and it would have been much more representative of movie action. So instead of a 7 or an 8 out of 10 here, we got a 3. Final score, 10 out of 30. Despite some crushing difficulty near the end that made me incapable of actually beating Sunsoft's Batman for Game Boy, there's a lot of fun gameplay to be had as Batman blasts away at baddies while playing through environments inspired by the movie. It's a pretty simple run and shoot kind of game that works very well on its platform, and there's something kind of charming about Batman's squat character design. Batwing shooter levels also vary things up a bit, adding a bit of Gradius to it all. All these components come together to give us a video game score of 15 out of 20, not bad. At a brand level, this one's pretty interesting. It follows the movie better than I expected it to, even including the act of defeating Jack Napier at Axis Chemicals near the beginning. This kind of blew me away when I found out about it through Nintendo Power back in the day. You even get digitized cutscenes that look pretty impressive given the hardware limitations. so it's off to a good start in terms of level design and overall presentation. But then there's the gameplay. Let's go back in time about 1 minute. Batman blasts away at baddies. That's one sentence I should never have to utter regarding The Dark Knight, and the Batman score suffers greatly as a result. 2 out of 10. So Batman for Game Boy is a 17 out of 30 overall. I was visiting absolutely as many arcades as I could in the early 90s, yet never in my life have I ever seen an actual Batman arcade cabinet, from Atari no less. But as MAME emulation assures me, it does exist, and it's very, shall we say, licensed gamey? I'll start with the Batman feeling of it all this time, because man, it really excels here. Like no other game on this list, you really are playing the movie, from the best looking graphics of the bunch to all of the major set pieces being included. This is the only Batman movie game with a digitized Danny Elfman score, and sound bites lifted from the film populate the entire game. To that end, I'm pretty sure this is the only video game appearance for the voice of Jack Nicholson ever. I wonder if he even knows. The only thing keeping Batman Arcade from a perfect 10 on the Batman score is the stupid Dracula-like pose as he walks. I mean, I guess he kind of did that to end the opening sequence to the TV show, but that was mainly for the cool fade into the logo. Has he ever posed like this anywhere else? Seriously, let me know in the comments. But yeah, we've definitely got a 9 out of 10 on the Batman score here. But gameplay? Oh man, I know it's an emulator and all, but it just controls so poorly. Your standard side-scrolling kick-punch affair, with the occasional grappling hook and a few driving levels that are okay, but nothing responds well at all. To that end, you never really ever beat up the Joker. You just kinda force him backward the whole time, on 3 different occasions.
Hold on.
With tighter gameplay, this game could have easily topped this list, but the 9 out of 20 it earns as a game drags things down to an 18 out of 30 all told. And now for the weird one. It's been reported that Sunsoft actively wanted its 4 different Batman movie games to all be very different from one another. No problem at all there with the PC Engine version. If you don't know, the PC Engine was what we Westerners know better as the TurboGrafx 16, which is the system name I would use here if Batman had ever actually left Japan. It didn't. This is not only this list's only Japan exclusive title, it's also the only Batman console game period that's exclusively released there. Playing it feels kinda like a weird mix of Pac-Man and the original Mario Brothers. Not Super Mario Brothers, mind you, Mario Brothers. Maybe even a little bit of Adventures of Lolo and a dash of Bomberman. You traverse these mazes and try to avoid the Joker's minions like a game of Pac-Man, and your power pellet of sorts comes in the form of a Batarang, which you can strengthen in both speed and distance through power-ups you pick up. Once you nail a thug with a Batarang, he's stunned like a KO'd Koopa in Mario Brothers, which is your chance to knock him out of the picture for good. It's a little annoying that you can't move while you're throwing a Batarang, and you will die a lot from that, but that's just part of the game and you learn to deal with it in a risk-reward kind of a way. Most levels are in some way based on movie content, and your objectives range from finding bombs to disarm them to finding paintings to de-vandalize them, like a true hero. It's all really weird and maybe a little repetitive, but undeniably fun. I was totally engaged with this one for quite a while, and it didn't even matter that a lot of the music was recycled from the NES version, which of course has great music itself. This is a solid 14 out of 20 as a video game. But yeah, it's pretty obvious this one does not really represent what you think of when you think Batman game. It's way too cute, and that might be a digital Adam West in the Batsuit instead of Michael Keaton. And the actions he's performing, again, he's taking the time to de-vandalize paintings here. They don't feel very Batman. That's a lot going against it as a solid representation of a gamified Burton Batman movie. But when it comes to the locations, it follows the film admirably well. Even the final battle very much falls in line with what happened atop Gotham City Cathedral, down to the guy falling through a hole. And check this out. How freaking cool was that for a home console game in 1990? So the decidedly non-Batman gameplay clashes with the incredibly Batman presentation to give us a 5 out of 10 for the Batman score. Altogether, that's a 19 out of 30 for the PC Engine, but it pretty much tops my games I want on the TurboGrafx mini list. And this is where things get very interesting. We have a 3-way tie for the top spot. How to resolve such a quandary? Personal bias. First up, the one I care least about, though it's still pretty neat. I'm frankly kind of shocked here. I never would have suspected that a game I just found out existed a few years ago ties for first on this list. But according to my rock-solid, undeniably accurate rating system, the game created by the British studio Ocean for numerous personal computers greatly succeeds at mixing a good video game with accurately representing its source material. Ocean published its Dark Knight, Dark Avenger? Title in Europe to quite a few different platforms, some of which we didn't have in North America, such as the ZX Spectrum, MSX, and Amstrad CPC. But the lead platform was the Amiga, and Data East published that version, as well as DOS and Commodore 64 outside of Europe. It's also worth noting that this was not only the first Batman game to market, but also the only non-Tiger Electronics one to hit shelves in the movie's release year of 1989. With the notable exception of a missing museum level, Ocean's Batman explores just about every major action set piece from the film, with an appropriate form of gameplay. Axis Chemicals and the Gotham City Cathedral bookend the game with action platforming levels that would be wholly unremarkable and average if not for an interesting grappling hook mechanic. Whereas the Genesis's grappling hook simply takes Batman up to higher levels, Ocean's game adds a swing mechanic that actually has some rudimentary degree of physics involved. It's not perfect, but it does add a little something extra that enhances the game both at a skill level and for some degree of puzzle solving. Other than that though, the batarang-based action disregards Batman's martial arts skills. One of the very few places this game misses the mark of what I expect from a movie game featuring the Dark Knight. Dark Avenger. The game not only solidly represents the main characters, but it also borrows thug designs from the likes of Bob the Goon and other Joker lackeys. There's an interesting, if short, mix of gameplay to be found in the middle as well. This includes controlling the Batmobile and the Batwing, a first for both in gaming, in ways indicative of their movie appearances. It feels great to shoot a grappling hook out to a lamppost for a sharp turn, and to snap the strings on the Joker's balloons. Ocean even added an odd puzzle game in the middle where you're in the Batcave figuring out an antitoxin for Smilex gas. I don't know that I'd call it great gameplay, but I love that they went there, and I did feel pretty good when I finally figured out how to solve the puzzle. The game notably features 0 boss fights, but you do get to knock Jack Napier into the acid, and this is the only game here where the Dark Knight, Dark Avenger, actually makes the Joker fall from a rope ladder during their final battle. Still different from the film, but definitely closer to what happened. All factors considered, Ocean's game pleasantly surprised me, combining a thoroughly decent 13 out of 20 video game score with an 8 out of 10 Batman score for a final score of 21 out of 30. I once stumbled upon Batman for Sega Genesis at a Software Etc., a game that arrived with pretty much no fanfare in 1991 well after the Bat hype had subsided, and I considered picking it up. But a quick look at the back of the box revealed screenshots identical to the action from the NES version. That's because it was screenshots from the NES version. Someone in Sunsoft marketing messed up big time, because they're way different. At a gameplay level, the Genesis version lacks the intensity, and certainly the difficulty, of the NES release. In fact, I'd say it's as easy as the NES version is hard. Even most boss fights simply involve a lot of jumping over the enemy and unleashing overpowered batarangs you probably were able to save up. But it has to be said that the action remains quite solid and fun throughout. I especially enjoyed using the grappling hook to ascend to higher platforms. I did run out of continues my first time playing, using the max allowed 7 men per game because really, who wouldn't? But not too terribly long before encountering Joker, whom I defeated on my second try once I did make it to him. Part of the lack of difficulty stems from super dumb enemies. They don't just shoot where Batman isn't a lot of the time, they actually sometimes will just shoot directly into walls. And if they're in an elevated position, their shins become very vulnerable. This is also the kind of game where simply touching an enemy hurts our armored hero, and where a sliding kick from the floor deals about the same amount of damage as a rocket launcher to the face. And while I'm complaining, the controls feel a little sticky, especially when double jumping, sometimes leading to some unfair feeling deaths. But that's as bad as it gets, being overall as inoffensive as it is unremarkable at a gameplay level. Lots of things that don't really make sense, and the occasional frustration, but at the end of the day, a decent enough way to relive the film you like. And oh yeah, it's got some fun side-scrolling Batmobile and Batwing shooter levels too. It all earns about a 13 out of 20 in terms of a video game score for me. At the same time, I commend the Genesis version for successfully gamifying the film's plot more than any other console game. From the streets of Gotham and the Joker's origin at Axis Chemicals, to the Flugelheim Museum, to Gotham City Cathedral, and with said appropriate Batmobile and Batwing levels thrown in, pretty much all of the movie's action comes to life here. We even see recognizable Joker goons like Machete Guy and Boombox Man as easily defeatable bosses, with a Joker battle that extends beyond his powers, but not by much. My biggest complaint? Batman moves like a power walker, because beating up dozens upon dozens of dudes isn't enough exercise. 8 out of 10 Batman score. Overall, 21 out of 30. Oh, like one of my favorite video games on my sentimental favorite video game system of all time wasn't going to top this list. Still, I'm guessing you were expecting a runaway win, something the 18 out of 20 gameplay score absolutely reflects. If only it performed so admirably when trying to respect the brand. Sunsoft's Batman for NES absolutely blows it when it comes to doing a good job of representing Tim Burton's take on the character and his universe. Let's start with the good though. The game is a classic on the system. In my 7th grade journal in April 1990, I wrote that the game mixed Ninja Gaiden and Double Dragon. And while that's not entirely accurate, I do give my 13-year-old self credit for kind of being in the ballpark. Maybe punchy Super Mario would be a better description than Double Dragon, as this is a straight 2D experience when it comes to movement, but there's certainly plenty of said punching to be had. You've also got special weapons you can awkwardly switch to with the start button, select as pause, one of which is the Batarang, and the other two being, well, we'll get to them shortly. But the action that I think really makes Batman NES stand out, what most people remember it for, is the wall jumping. Yeah, I can do this all day. In fact, this is one of my favorite gifts on the internet. The difficulty can be brutal at times, but thankfully the continues never stop. And if you keep at it long enough, you're going to get good enough to beat the Joker. That said, if there's one thing that holds the action back from a perfect 20 out of 20, It's that the feeling I get when winning boss fights is more of a "I'm lucky I survived that" than a "wow, I've truly mastered that now." And for as hard as the game may be in any situation, it certainly helps that one of the NES's best soundtracks is accompanying all of your tries, and retries, and retries, and retries, and more retries. They go on and on. But if by chance you've seen this early video on this channel, you know the Batman-ness of Batman-ness leaves a lot to be desired. It all starts with the purple suit. While it's probably true that turning the Dark Knight into the Periwinkle Paladin does make him pop more on the screen, a black suit still would have worked. Or why not just go comics accurate blue and gray? Meanwhile, the level progression only adequately follows the movie. We do visit Axis Chemicals, but only what would have been the second time in the film, when Batman barely leaves the Batmobile and ruthlessly murders whoever's in there. Speaking of trademark vehicles, there are no Batmobile or Batwing levels, just some cutscenes involving them, and the game totally ignores the museum set piece. Instead, we get some sewers and the Joker's lab, which is way too high-tech for a street-level gangster, even one adept in chemistry. It's kind of cool that Sunsoft obviously consulted a who's who of the DC Universe issue to dig up names like Deadshot, Maxi Zeus, Heatwave, and more, but none of the in-game characters tend to echo their comic counterparts beyond Killer Moth flying and Firefly using fire. They made KG Beast a cyber ninja. What? This misuse of character identification exemplifies how trying to reference source material can actually backfire and make things less authentic. I honestly suspect these characters were created for another game, but then Sunsoft got the license and slapped Batman character names on them. I guess there's some solace in the fact that Joker looks like himself in the final battle. If only he weren't 8 feet tall and capable of summoning lightning. I don't remember that happening in the film. And every other time we see him, ho ho ho, Green Joker. Oh, and remember those other weapons I mentioned earlier? Guns. 2 different projectile weapons designed for killing. Yes, I know this Batman ends the occasional life, but guns are never involved regardless. I hate saying it, but if I'm being real, the Batman score here is just a 3 out of 10, making for a 21 out of 30 final score. Fun side note, at one point the game actually ended by defeating Firefly. There was no Joker boss fight initially planned. A prototype ROM has been found with this ending and some alternate cutscenes as well. So there you have it, the absolutely definitive ranking of every Batman movie game ever released. Do you agree with the results? Did anything surprise you? Let me know in the comments. Just be nice. Batman would want it that way. And if you like my style of reviewing old school licensed games, or you just like superhero games in general, be sure to subscribe. I'll also be celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Sega Genesis launching in North America by counting down all 30-something superhero games ever released for the system. That's well underway, but will also take another few months to chip away at. Where do you suppose Batman lands in there? How do you think it stacks up against the other Batman games on Genesis? Enough rambling. I'll see you next time.